Well, didn't think I'd ever be making a video with a title like this. Disclaimer, with subject matter of this nature, we can't show full visual evidence without risking YouTube making the video inaccessible, so at some points today you're just gonna have to take us at our word. To make a long story short though, Funimation previously announced they would be simulcasting the anime interspecies reviewers this season on their streaming platform Funimation Now, with both subtitles and an English simuldub itself, which would be 2 weeks behind the Japanese airing. However, after episode 3 of the sub and episode 1 of the dub, that is no longer the case.
異種族レビュアーズを長い間応援してくださりありがとうございました。これからもレビュアーズはあなたの心の中に生き続け。
The Australian streaming site Anime Lab announced that they would continue the show after a short delay, but it isn't clear what a just sourcing of materials means for now. Are they talking about the footage? Is someone else going to be translating it? Anime Lab is in a global partnership with Funimation, so what's going to happen for the dub? In any case, the damage to the community is already done. The news first broke from Twitter user Halgania Ken, who had received an email from Funimation support, and was later confirmed by an update to the post Funimation initially made for their winter slate of shows. The statement in both cases being, after careful consideration, we determined that this series falls outside of our standards. We have the utmost respect for our creators, so rather than substantially alter the content, we felt like taking it down was the most respectful choice. Now, even with that said, the series had already encountered no shortage of censorship depending on the platform, even with a content warning at the start of the episode. This censorship included cutouts covering nipples and genitalia, select words in the subtitles being flat out removed, or even scenes in which the entire screen is covered in black. This all kind of begs the question, what are those standards Funimation mentioned? They've licensed and even dubbed incredibly lewd shows like High School DxD, The Seven Mortal Sins, Bikini Warriors, and Valkyrie Drive Mermaid, all of which you'd think were porn if you caught me watching them in my living room.
So let's back up to months ago when Funimation licensed the show. Okay, so their licensing team is completely different from their production team. In fact, most of their licensing team is in Japan because they have to be there to sign the deals. It's just easier. They can take care of materials delivery, and they do their due diligence. That said, or not hentai, not porn, but really pervy, ecchi stuff has always done very well.
The only other time Funimation has allegedly suspended a dub due to the show's content is Hybrid Heart, likely due to something in the OVAs, but I can't confirm that for sure. Even setting that aside, the premise of this show is literally about sex workers in a fantasy world. Wouldn't it make sense for them to expect there would be footage of, you know, sex in this show? Well, actually, they might have a reason in this case. Interspecies Reviewers is an anime adaptation of the manga by the same name by Amahara and Masha, and the story of both are almost identical. A group of adventurous comrades go around to different brothels having sex with the various different species of girls that exist in this fantasy setting, to see what they do and don't like. They each write down their individual reviews for the species in adjacent rows on a single piece of paper with a rating out of 10. And that paper then gets posted on the bulletin board of the local inn so that regulars can read the individual reviews to see how each of the reviewers' tastes compare. The reason I'm explaining it in such an overly step-by-step fashion is because the reviews themselves are pretty much all the evidence of the sex in the manga. We usually get the main cast showing up to a brothel, see them choose their girls, and after that the reviews appear. Notice something missing? The sex scenes that had been censored so heavily in the anime version thus far straight up didn't exist in the original manga. In fact, the manga in general has been far less explicit. Nipples are almost always covered up by objects in the scene or else not drawn at all. Granted, there are nipples in the manga around chapter 11, but not for any of the content that's been adapted into anime so far. And even Crim the Angel's bulge is less detailed than how it's drawn in the anime. The reviews are essentially just words that you read on paper, which is how the in-universe characters experience these reviews and, by extension, how they find out how the sex was. Coincidentally, when you're reading manga, you're also just reading paper, so it's not too unnatural when an in-universe written review just takes the place of a static page. But reading words isn't the reason people watch anime, unless you only watch subbed anime. We can argue the Japanese anime staff could have animated the sex scenes in a less overt manner, but one way or another, anime creators just have to make use of the audiovisual medium. Otherwise, they aren't doing their job to make a good show. And at the end of the day, I think anyone who sits down to watch an anime would like to see what a written review describes as well, rather than only seeing the written review on their screen and nothing else.
Hold on a sec. Is she taking it up the ass?
Imagine if the entirety of Star Wars was just the opening text crawl describing all the events. Though that might have still been better than The Rise of Skywalker. Regardless, could this explain why Funimation initially agreed to distribute and dub an anime that borders on hentai only to back out later? Did they read the manga and conclude that it was a tame enough ecchi to distribute, only to be shocked at all the explicit content the anime added? I think that definitely could be part of it, but I'm not entirely sure it explains everything. Funimation had to at least preview some of the footage beforehand. But as this is the anime industry where materials are sometimes submitted in the nick of time, I can't reliably confirm how much of the material they had when they started.
The market is, especially if you're Funimation right now, is dictated entirely by streaming. Because everything's for streaming and the licensing landscape is so competitive, they have to license these shows sight unseen. They're not done when they're buying them, so they don't know what they're getting.
If they only got to see episode 1 before the dubbing started, then that would make some sense, since unlike some of the following episodes, its content still seemed to be within the realm of what Funimation would air, like High School DxD. But because of all this new explicit material not present in the manga, they could no longer anticipate how extreme the episodes would get until they got them. And I know we're getting into the territory of quantifying how explicit something is, so might as well say it up front. I've seen hentai. I know what kind of things go on in hentai, and I think I have a decent idea of the extent to which hentai will go that other anime will not. I don't think there's any official distinction, but based off of my experience in this field, as well as asking around, one of the things that hentai will show that puts it beyond an R-rated ecchi is actual penis in vagina sex. Although, rape scenes, which are clearly meant to make the viewer feel uncomfortable rather than titillated, will often appear in more dramatic anime for the sake of showing trauma, or painting a picture of a villain's worst misdeeds. And these scenes do not class those anime as either ecchi or hentai, as the context arguably isn't meant to make the viewer feel good. And while the manga version only implied this through what's described in the reviews, episode 3 of the anime actually shows the scene in question. We don't actually see the genitalia, but maybe even showing the action itself was cutting it too close, and that's not even getting into any of the stuff in episode 4. Now, I imagine scenes of this nature could only get a pass if they were extremely comedically slanted, downplaying the overtly sexual aspect with humor. After all, Funimation did dub Panty and Stocking, which frequently does that. But I've seen that moment in interspecies reviewers, and it was not comedically slanted. Sentai Filmworks has been known to license lewd shows more frequently than other distributors, including聖痕のクェイサー, which is literally all about breastfeeding. But even that show technically isn't hentai. The reason I point this out is because of another distributor well known for localizing content like this. Media Blasters has dubbed some very risque anime, including Lady vs. Butlers, Holy Knight, and Juden-chan. But they also have another label called Kitty Media, including their Hentai Heaven collection. This seems to be where their hentai with on-screen sex like Bible Black is delegated. And honestly, that's one of the best ways we could find to tell what official distributors might consider too hardcore for the mainstream, though I imagine the unspoken official reason could be even more complex. Another factor might be the studio producing it, and while Passione has certainly produced some risque ecchi like High School DxD Hero and Yuri like Citrus, both of which have been dubbed by Funimation, they aren't what I would call a dedicated hentai studio like Milky or Pink Pineapple.
The streaming ecosystem works pretty well because 95% of anime that gets made now is okay enough that it won't. Even if somebody filed a complaint, no one would really have any problem. This time they couldn't really say that.
I was definitely surprised by what was shown in episode 1, as it went beyond what you usually see in common garden seasonal anime. But by and large, it more so felt like an ecchi that was pushing the envelope. Nothing a few cutouts over nipples and vaginas couldn't fix for the streaming version. And then, maybe the Blu-ray version would be uncensored or something similar to High School DxD. Episode 2 and 3, however, those flirted more closely with what I've seen, designated as hentai. Obviously I can't show specifics, but again, I can assure you the details in question were not drawn in the manga at all. So with being unable to predict how far into hentai territory a series they thought was just an ecchi based on its manga would go, perhaps Funimation didn't want to gamble with that on an episode-by-episode basis anymore. Their statement says this was due to respect for the creators, but at the end of the day, Funimation is a for-profit distributor like every licensing company, and there's only so many scenes you can just entirely black out before the product becomes virtually unwatchable. Although another factor could be that this content would cause trouble for the services that offer Funimation's streaming app, such as Google Play, PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, and so on.
Mary briefly talked about that. She said, as someone who has developed programs for several streaming apps, iTunes Store, and smart TVs, etc., are very strict about content. Had one of our apps from Midnight Pulp rejected due to content. So,
yep, those apps are up right now. Funimation has done a very good job getting them up everywhere, but it's not hard to get those taken down if they give them a reason.
But again, given what they've dubbed in the past, I'd be able to form a more clear opinion on this decision if we knew what Funimation's standards are, especially since their platform is an online streaming service that isn't beholden to broadcast restrictions or expectations from advertisers that cause anime to get censored on Western television. We've seen Funimation stream a version of Fire Force on their website that was more explicit than what was broadcast on Toonami, so it seems like they are at least open to standards that are less strict than Western television, but more strict than what exactly? That clarification is important, and without it, people are forced to fill in the blanks themselves. A lot of people have been comparing this situation to the 4Kids dub of One Piece. For those who don't know, it's been suggested that 4Kids agreed to dub One Piece without being aware of what kind of show it even was, as it contained graphic violence and sexual imagery that went past the safe for kids mold they tried to force anime within. The result was some of the most laughable forms of localization censorship we've ever seen, and the dub ended in the middle of the action with no resolution. The implication here is that Funimation, like 4Kids, should have known better about the contents of the show that they were trying to dub. But I don't think this comparison completely works, not only because, as we stated above, Funimation might have had a bit of a reason to expect something different, but also because, unlike 4Kids with One Piece, the dub team showed a lot more respect to the original material. The one dub episode of Interspecies Reviewers that exists is actually solid, and might have unironically been one of the strongest simuldubs this season. With other ecchi shows Funimation has streamed, their dubs tend to punch up the dialogue a lot, and while some fans might find this approach appealing, that isn't exactly what we got here. Compared to the official subtitles, the dub script is very accurate, give or take a few things. Then again, that might sound hypocritical of us, since earlier this year we released a video praising the dub of Dr. Stone where we pointed out that the Crunchyroll subtitles left various elements out, which the dub staff preserved by researching the manga. This suggests that subtitles aren't always as authoritative on a show's true meaning as many fans might think. But another reason Interspecies Reviewers getting dropped is such a shame is because the translations in the subtitles were also excellent. Katrina Leonidakis is a Sega translator who also does anime translation for Sentai Filmworks and Funimation, having worked on titles such as O Maidens in Your Savage Season, Chihaya Furu, and School Live. Her subtitles for Interspecies Reviewers have been largely praised, and not just by viewers, but also Japanese to English translators both inside and outside the anime industry. You can tell she did her best to retain all the punchlines through puns in some very inventive ways, all in an attempt to keep the humor as vivid as possible in both languages.
Going to heaven, huh? More like coming to heaven, am I right?
Unfortunately, we don't know who's even responsible for this dub. A couple of the actors announced their roles on Twitter, but Funimation never released an official cast or staff list. Side note, even if this dub wasn't cancelled, there's still a chance the actors and staff wouldn't have been officially revealed. Sometimes actors prefer not to be credited or use a pseudonym on anime that are on the raunchier side of things. It might not always be out of disrespect for the material itself, it's just that having a show like this tied to their name could look personally embarrassing, or even off-putting to other clients when they're trying to get hired for non-anime acting roles. Disney, notably, will not hire most actors who have explicit ties to overtly sexual productions on their resume. This is why I don't think the actors themselves have had anything to do with this cancellation. Some people in the industry are comfortable with working on lewd stuff and some aren't, so they could have just been recast or the show could have continued sub only. Regardless, I think a lot of these performances were nice and played into the crude humor of the show quite well. In particular, Zelen Mitsue, or Mitsu as the dub calls her, sounded hilarious.
No way, a 500-year-old elf? That's older than my mom. Who'd want to fuck that? Have some class, man. Age is really nothing but a number. A good woman never wilts, no matter how old she might get.
Who knew our humble opinions would earn us gold? And a whole lot of it at that!
I guess I was expecting Stunk to sound a little older, and there are a couple of other new decisions.
Welcome back in, gentleman.
The cat puns are all in the original, but in the dub, that girl and a couple of other background characters have these exotic pseudo-European accents. Personally, I think they work fine in this cliché fantasy setting and sounded silly enough for a comedy show that they don't distract me, but others may feel differently. The only other minor changes this dub makes are a couple of awkward sounding euphemisms that aren't even inaccurate for the scenes they appear in, they just sound weird. Other than that, for some reason they say Mitsue is 60 years old when in the original she's around 50, and this Lamia near the end of the episode has a more feminine voice in the dub despite having a more masculine voice in the original. Also, this guy.
Hold on, man, aren't you still a virgin?
Not gonna lie, I kind of love how silly it is, but he sounds nothing like that in the original, so you may not. Again, I'm not sure how much this will add up to for people, but a lot of us enjoyed how this first episode was handled and would have liked to see the rest of the series given treatment like this. We've gone over several of these topics in our video about simuldubs in a more general sense. The staff for the Fuka dub couldn't have predicted the you-know-what in the anime adaptation, even if they'd read the entirety of the manga in preparation. Not every anime is adapted as straightforwardly as something like My Hero Academia, and the lack of foresight that can ensue sometimes heavily impacts a dub.
And, because we're talking about different departments in different countries, because they have to license these shows sight unseen, if the licensing guys were just, flipping through the manga version and, they were just going on, the initial design sketches and such, they would obviously have had a rude awakening a couple episodes later.
They could have just buckled down and kept the show. But then there's talk about how it wouldn't be okay to sell this on home video alongside their more popular stuff, as they are quite a popular distributor, despite the fact that anime without Western physical releases is nothing new in this age of streaming. Maybe they should have just not bothered with the show at all, even ignoring the safer impression given by the manga, and avoiding it on the basis of the premise alone. Which, yeah, would have been fair, but since they're discontinuing a great translation and dub, I don't want to say that either. Like we highlighted in a prior video, this is a consequence of trying to license as much as possible at the very start of the season without waiting to see what the anime will be like in the long run. At the very least, couldn't there have been better communication between the Western and Eastern sides, such as inquiring if the adaptation would be adding or modifying certain kinds of scenes? If Funimation, or really any licensor, want to avoid this from happening again, they have to change their approach to seasonal anime. In the end, the people who suffer the most are the localization staff who lose jobs due to factors outside of their control. But for now, all we can really do is wait and see how Anime Lab handles the series in Australia. Right now, I don't know how the censorship will be done, whether or not the translation will be done by someone else, or what will happen with the dub, if anything at all. Simuldubbing may not provide the most time or foresight as we've discussed before, but if it goes well, there's nothing quite like having a great dub to watch as the show comes out in Japan. Something new to listen to every week. And to see this one potentially go while far worse have finished their run makes us pretty sad. And that's just us. Imagine how the people who worked on bringing this show into English felt about it. So please, give Katrina Leonidakis a follow on Twitter. She posts a lot of interesting insight about localization in general. And maybe even check out some of the shows that she's translated for. Massive thank you for everyone that's tuning in, and huge thanks to our patrons for supporting our channel, including Reagan Senpai, Ron Rodriguez, Seth Phillips, JR Pictures, Spartacus, and Unknown Secret 1000. This has been the Cartoon Cypher, and sayonara interspecies reviewers, one of the only unironically good hentai dubs.